Hi kids. If you are hearing me on this video, then that means I'm not here on Friday either, which means that my daughter's not quite good enough. So I wanted to go through the quiz that I gave uh, today. I'm sorry, yesterday, as you're seeing this. So here's the quiz. As I went through it, I was actually really more interested, not in the first two questions, but the second two questions, where you had to give an example of evidence and then finally elaborate on it. Um, and that was the most important part for me. So I went through and I graded everyone's, and I came up with a few of them that were close, but didn't quite meet the expectation of what's good evidence, what's good elaboration. And then finally, I came up with good evidence on my own and elaboration, what I expect of you. And make sure to give you this example. So if you look at the evidence up here for this first one, a student wrote, "The My Lai massacre was one of the most horrific events of violence committed against unarmed civilians." I think it was the best evidence. Okay, um, so it's a really good start. However, it doesn't address anything about the My Lai massacre bringing about anti-war sentiment, and which helped bring the end of the war. So that was a huge part of it. So a lot of students, you mentioned that the My Lai massacre was this terrible massacre. Okay, that's the what. Now, why is it important? Well, of course, it brought a lot of anti-war sentiment. If you missed that part of it, then I put that you did not have enough evidence, which is a lot of students. So you got to make sure you read the whole thing and make sure you get the gist of it. Um, and then this next one is an example right here where the student wrote word for word what it said in the article, which is fine. However, they didn't put quotes or cite their source, and that's a big problem. So you need to make sure you cite your source. So they would have been just fine. You could have gotten a 3 with putting this in, but you need to put it in quotes and say according to the article. So that's evidence. The best evidence, I'll show you an example in a minute. So elaboration, it supports, here's the first one. A student wrote, "It supports why the U.S. lost because it tells us what the effect of the My Lai massacre was. Unfortunately, it's way too vague, meaning there's not enough there for me. It kind of leaves us hanging there. It supports the U.S. lost because it tells you what the effect of, well, what was the effect of the My Lai massacre? The U.S. lost because of it? Well, you got to bridge that gap now." Another student wrote, "Because I think most people want to know how the war went and if it was good or bad." Once again, way too vague. And really good start. However, you got to be specific with your language because this could mean anything. And finally, the last piece of elaboration was that a student wrote is the U.S. was surprised by what they had done and had basically given up on them. So in effort, they lost. So they wrote they, them, and they 3 different times. So I don't know who they're talking about or what's going on. That's way too vague. You got to be specific with who you're talking about here. So I came up with this evidence and elaboration myself. This is what would be considered an acceptable answer. So I wrote, according to history.com, U.S. soldiers attacked the village of My Lai because they thought the Viet Cong soldiers were there. The U.S. soldiers killed innocent civilians, and the military then covered it up. Finally, the people of the U.S. and around the world found out about the massacre, which helped to bring about anti-war feelings. So if you see there, I got the whole paragraph covered. I did summarize it. Like I said before, if you wanted to put this quote in there, you could. It'd be stronger if you were to summarize it in your own words. So you need to figure out what the facts are and put it in your own words. So that would be evidence. I have everything covered in the article that's important. Finally, elaboration. I wrote, the My Lai massacre added gas to the fire for the anti-war protesters, which helped bring about an end to the conflict. The protesters did put pressure on the U.S. government, to end the war, which they eventually did. So once again, I did use the word they, but I also referred to the protesters first. So you need to make sure you're not just using they and the and them. Make sure you use the actual people, like the actual event, the My Lai massacre, anti-war protesters, the conflict. Then I talk about the protesters again and the U.S. government. So be specific with your elaboration and your evidence with who you're talking about. Don't just write they, them, and they again. I don't know who you're talking about, and it's not acceptable. So I expect your elaboration and your evidence in your work to be as good as this, and that will give you a 3, maybe even borderline 4. Uh, anyways, I'm going to put this on this slide and give you this so you can look at as an example. So I'm going to be assessing just these 3 slides, so make sure they're really good. All right. Of course, you still need an introduction and conclusion, but I'm emphasizing these three reasons. All right. If you have any questions, please email me. And have a wonderful Friday. See you on Monday.